Welcome back to Not a Straight Line with me, Pete Daly-Dickson. This is the show that explores the non-linear journeys of artists and entrepreneurs to inspire you as you zigzag through your own non-straight line life. And this week, I'm joined by actor and entrepreneur extraordinaire Joshua Morgan. This was an amazing conversation, if for no other reason than Joshua absolutely captures and embodies the essence of what this podcast is all about. With a passion for theatre sparked at the age of 11 from going to a Broadway show, Joshua initially pursued a traditional route to a career in acting, only to find it lacking, I guess, in the aspects that he believes every actor needs in their world. And that is the entrepreneurial acumen to be a business unto themselves. It is from this mentality that he zigged and zagged to running the first dual city theatre company in America. And our conversation actually started at a point in Joshua's life when he had to make a life-changing decision. The conversation found its way to where he is now with a thriving acting career and a podcast and business educating actors about the entrepreneurial aspect of their creative life. We definitely got tangential in this chat, as we often do on Not a Straight Line. And you'll learn why I am so grateful for this connection with Joshua that I'm certain will carry on beyond this recording. Without much ado about anything, let's get to it.
So I'm actually from Bournemouth. That's where I'm from. And many of my family are still over there.
When you say from, you mean you were born there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, years ago.
Yeah.
I miss England very much. I don't know why but actually before I moved to New York, I was considering, for political reasons, I was considering moving to the UK in all seriousness. And I had a few opportunities to work over there, but the money, it's tough. You know, I do mainly theater and it's tough. It's tough to be 100% with you. Commercially, it's just not at the same level that I couldn't justify heading back.
How old were you when you left?
Very young, as you can probably tell. I left when I was about 3, and then I went to the States, and then went back when I was 7 for a bit, and then back to the States. So really, I mean, I have dual citizenship. It's where I'm from, but I really identify obviously as an American. My mother's American, my father's British.
Okay. I just love the whole essence of Not a Straight Line, because we've been talking for 2 minutes, 44 seconds, and already we've explored zigs and zags from being born in Bournemouth and going out and coming back. And we've done that without me even formally, in inverted commas, welcoming you to the podcast. So Joshua Morgan, welcome to Not a Straight Line.
Thank you, Pete. I'm happy to be here. I'm thrilled, actually.
Yeah. So you and I, well, this is the first time that we've met face to face. I heard you on the Castability podcast, and the things that you and your business partner were talking about that really, really resonated with me. And you obviously checked me out and saw that we're on the kind of same page with that, and that will unfold and unpack as we go. But the way that I like to start these conversations off is really just encouraging my guests to think about. These conversations are a space, a container, just to slow down and reflect. And as you do that and reflect back on your life, what are some times, or one time in particular, where there was either a change of direction or a change of focus for you, or maybe a time where there felt like a lot of pressure, or the stakes were particularly high in terms of what you were going to do or not do, that perhaps precipitated a zag away from what you were doing? Does anything come to mind for you?
It does, and I'll get to it by way of saying, hey, I'm very happy to be having this conversation with you. I know that from what I've read and can tell, your journey has been quite literally not a straight line as well, as an entrepreneur heading into then the arts. And I would argue all of entrepreneurship is not a straight line, right? It's a high risk endeavor that we're sort of have to live in some sense of delusion to believe that we're going to be able to accomplish X, Y, or Z, and then we roll with the punches.
Yeah. But anything in life, not just
anything in life.
Yeah.
Sure, of course. But I spend a lot of my time thinking through the lens of, what it means to run a business. And it actually gets to your question, because when I first started my career as an artist, I was graduating from university here in the States, and I had a strong sense that I was not going to work commercially in either LA or New York, just because of the way I looked. It was a different time. We'd live in a moment when, we're accepting of all kinds, and there's almost a push for identity and embracing that. But I didn't look like everybody else.
Did you study theatre? Was that your?
I did. I studied. Yeah, I studied as an actor at the School of the Arts in North Carolina. But I ended up founding a theater company. That's where I really started. I founded a theater company. It was the first dual city theater company in the United States. We were based in North Carolina and in Washington, D.C. And where it gets to your question about the biggest zigzag, so to speak, I love DC. I loved my time in DC. I loved running my company. I was performing full time and running my company full time and teaching. It was actually kind of amazing. And then in August of 2015, I was afforded this opportunity to audition for the last revival of Les Miserables, and it was to cover Thénardier. And I was sort of looking at it, and I was responsible for this
Great role.
Fabulous role, and I was sort of at this crossroads, right? I mean, it was just the audition, but I got to tell you, Pete, I really had this I had this sense, even though I really didn't come from doing musicals, honestly, and even though I didn't have any representation, I had no New York credits, I just had this sense, and I prepped like my life depended on it, and I auditioned for it at 4 p.m. I think it was August 14th. And August 15th, I got a call at 10 a.m. if I would like to join the company as soon as the next day. All of a sudden, I was in this moment where I had this company, this amazing board that had invested years and millions of dollars into my theater company, two communities that had done the same, a home in Washington, D.C., a partner. And I sort of went, okay, well, if I go back to the beginning of where this all started from, for me wanting to pursue this career as an artist, how could I not take up the opportunity to be on Broadway? And literally overnight, my entire life changed. And I uprooted myself. My company was dissolved. My home was gone. My relationship of many years ended. And I essentially started pursuing a very different career, even though they're in the same world, working regionally in the not-for-profit world as an artistic director, teaching at various universities. It was a very different life than choosing a full-time freelance career as an actor in a major market. And to be 100% with you, while I'm not really someone who regrets many things, the two regrets I have in my life come from that moment. One, how things ended with my partner at the time. And two, that company meant so much to me. The ability to give artists jobs, to curate seasons, the communities. And I was really disappointed in how, for myself too, but some with my board, about how things were transitioned out. And I look back at that. And those are two regrets that come out of it. And besides that, the last 9 years of my life have been a whirlwind of hills and valleys because of that zag. But that's the one that comes up for me first when you ask that question.
And I used the phrase where the stakes were high, and the stakes were immensely high because you were giving up so much.
So much. Actually, do you want me to tell you? I'll tell you one funny anecdote as part of this too. This is kind of very funny. It kind of ties in with this. When I got the audition notice, I was sitting in jury duty in Washington, D.C. I was sitting in jury duty. And I remember I was sitting in the long hall, and they were playing some video about, these are all the protocols. This is what you have to be a juror, da, da, da. And I saw the audition notice, and I said, I'm going to get this. And I went to the window, and I said, just to confirm, I actually don't live in D.C. I did. I lived down the street. I live in New York. And she said, you live in New York? Well, why would you be here? And I said, well, because I do work in D.C. and I had a home here. And she goes, okay, well, you need to prove proof of residence within 2 weeks. So I walked out of the courthouse and I went and started to prepare the audition. And no joke, first of all, let me tell you something, don't mess with jury duty, because there was an actual warrant out for my arrest, because even after I booked the show, I didn't have a home yet. And I had to expedite all of that, and a friend of mine who was a partner at a big law firm in DC had to write this long letter showing my contract on Broadway. But quite literally, if I didn't book the show and I had gone back and said, actually, I lied to you, there was also a $5,000 fine, something crazy. Like I really put it all on the line, assuming I was going to get this.
But in terms of setting a powerful intention and giving your subconscious evidence of the reality that you lived in or that you wanted to live in, I can see that you did that in spades. Yeah.
riskily so. But isn't that kind of, again, and going back to entrepreneurship, isn't that again kind of what I would argue it sort of somewhat takes, right? Big swings and a sense of slight disillusionment at times that it's going to pan out. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And again, I would argue in terms of that SAG, much of it panned out. I have an amazing partner of 8 years now, another beautiful home in Brooklyn, etc. But there were things that I wish had gone better. And I'm still actually trying to repair relationships from all those years ago because of that zag as well, just because of what people invested in me again.
Yeah. No, we will come back to that. One of the hallmarks of these not a straight line conversations is that they are not a straight line themselves.
Yeah.
I'm really interested and curious in the young Joshua growing up. What was your childhood like? What were you into? Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I'm an only child. My mother is a very young mother. I don't think I would call myself an accident per se, but she was actually on holiday in England when she was 18 when she had me. So it was somewhat accidental that I even was born over in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I had to grow up very quickly as a kid and become very independent. Not because there weren't people looking after me per se, but because I was in a circumstance where my mother was growing up right alongside me. And my father was a bit absent because he was also very young and he got himself into some trouble. Had come over, tried to follow me actually over to the States, but then ended up being deported. And so it was a hills and valleys, not a straight line as life is. But I was actually in California, and when I was younger, I had a big interest in law. I'd probably be much more stable and well off if I had pursued that career, to be 100% with you. So I was in Los Angeles.
But maybe more bored.
But maybe a lot more bored, actually. I don't know. Sometimes maybe it's just all the crime dramas I watch. But sometimes I watch them and I'm like, I don't know. I'd be good at that. That looks like fun.
Because they're just like reality, aren't they, Joshua?
Exactly. So I was in California. Which is a very different life from when I moved to the East Coast and I saw my first Broadway show. I'm sure I see the playbill behind me. 1998, the revival of Annie Get Your Gun with Bernadette Peters, and it changed my life. And
how old were you?
I was 11 years old.
Okay.
And truly, no joke, from that moment on, I was sort of pretty all in on, I think, going back to the point about growing up and needing to find independence. And still to this day, this is true, what I'm about to say. When I get to act, when I get to do that singular job, that's my only focus. I don't have to be right. In fact, I can be wrong. It's my job to sort of not take care of other people, not be the most responsible, just to do what I'm doing. And I found, and I'm sure you've heard this, and it's a bit of an esoteric thought, but it's where I get to actually express all the shades of me that I might not be able to for whatever reason in the day to day. And so pretty quickly I was like, oh, this is the place that I can let it out. Not like it's therapy, but like all the colors of who I am are allowed and accepted. And so pretty immediately from 11 on, I'm 37 now, it was sort of, I've been very focused on building a career as an artist and curious about what that takes. Because as I think and explore, and why we're even having this conversation today, I think there's not a lot of open conversations about the truths about what that actually means. And it feels so dire to me because you and I both know so many, many, many artists who are so talented and yet are unable to cross that threshold into making this actually sustainable. It seems to mean more to me as I get older. I know that could have diverged from your question, not a straight line again, but that's it.
Well, So, just taking me back to the 11-year-old, you just had this epiphany, and you get your gun, and you said that since then it's been all-consuming. So, how did that all-consuming nature of it manifest as an 11-year-old growing up in California, or had you moved to New York at that time?
Moments after I did. So I believe because I was 11, so you must have been moments after we were on a trip. We must have probably been looking at places to live, honestly. And moments after I moved here, and then pretty quickly, I mean, I started learning about what it meant to be an actor. So I started getting the then physical copy of Backstage. There were no online submissions then. And I remember I ended up in this play at this little off Broadway play at this theater called the Rion Theater. I don't know if it's still even around here in Tribeca. The Shirley Jackson play, The Lottery, and no BS. I can still smell like the backstage. I remember I was in this room with all these adults who were saying such inappropriate things as a kid, and I remember, like, even at 14, like trying to go and audition for the national tour of Oklahoma, and them handing me my headshot back and saying, you're very talented, but you're too young. So, and I really just started chipping away at what that meant. And I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts here, which they had like a 2-year program. And my life just became all about it. And any opportunity I could to take a class or learn about the business. And I started interning at an agent's office here in New York called DGRW, still around, when I was 16, and just started learning how this thing actually works. And my mother is very entrepreneurial herself. She never went to college, but she has done amazing things and has actually in senior staff for the mayor of Newark, New Jersey now, having not even been in politics, and has had a storied, varied career. I say all that because as I was trying to understand what it would take for me to be an actor, I was watching her work her ass off to survive herself and to start many other businesses. And so I was sort of being instilled, I think, with a naturally entrepreneurial spirit, which I think you would probably agree with is what's needed for anybody who wants to sell a painting or their dance skills, or let alone acting. So those things were happening probably between 11 and 18. And then I went to conservatory, which was really important to me. And in conservatory, you don't pick a single class. Your classes for 4 years are all outlined. Actually, I'll be 100%. I actually opted out of getting my appropriate BFA and not take any academics because I was all in. So even in school, I was producing things and directing outside of our normal classes because that was all I ever wanted to do.
So that the conservatory came after the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. So what's the difference there? Maybe the drama education system's different in the US.
Well, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which still exists, I think they have various programs. The program that I was in was more like an after school. So, I would go and I would be part of it. It was more for kids my age, 15 to 18, before going to college.
Okay, right. So which conservatory did you go to?
I went to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts.
Okay, yeah, you said
Actually, it was funny. I was going to go originally going to school for musical theater. I saw it, Get Your Gun. I loved it. And I know the UK actually now has several MT programs, which is interesting, because 30 years ago, these programs were a bit unique. But musical theater has become such a high ticket item in the industry that programs are really turning them over. But when I was auditioning for those programs, the ones here in the States, CCM, Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, Ithaca, every time I'd audition, Pete, they kept asking me, "Well, are you interested in our acting program?" And I didn't really I was kind of offended, I didn't really understand why they kept asking me that. But I say all that because the School of the Arts was the only acting program that didn't even have an MT program that I auditioned for. And thank God I did, because I think my career has been built and predicated on the fact that I'm first and foremost an actor who sings, which has allowed me to honestly separate myself a bit in the market.
I always thought that it's far more interesting seeing exactly that, an actor who can sing. Maybe they can't sing as well as somebody who's been to, Royal Academy of Music or whatever, but you're telling a story, and those skills as an actor sort of
Totally
are then
agree.
amplified by the singing.
I totally agree. Wait, do you know Maria Friedman?
The name rings a bell. Yeah,
She's British, and her sister Sonia Friedman. They both produce a ton. Maria actually just
yeah. Produce. Yeah, I knew Sonia Friedman.
yeah, and the reason I bring up Maria Friedman, I hope she doesn't. If she ever hears this, she doesn't take offense to it. She just directed the amazing revival of Merrily Roll Along here in New York. But Maria, I remember seeing her as a kid, and she's British, and she's a great actor. Her voice is it's a little rough around the edges, but that's okay. Meaning, like it kind of it's, as my partner would say, it's sexier. It just has it's just is life there. I sometimes I worry that musical theater is becoming too neutered, honestly. So anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, you can hear it in a voice, can't you? It's a life lived.
Yeah, exactly, 100%, 100%. That's why I mean, do you go see a lot of theater in London?
We're a couple of hours out from London. Not a huge amount. I could probably watch more, but life.
Of course, life's. A couple hours out in 2024 is actually, can feel like a week.
Yeah.
Everything moves so quickly. I ask because I love going to see theater in London because it always tends, in my opinion, to be alive on all kinds of levels. I'm not knocking New York theater by any means, but I'm specifically talking about even musicals that seem to, again, have more of that grit, that life lived that you're talking about. So anyway, that's how I ended up at the School of the Arts a bit, which again, I'm super grateful for, before then going again to DC to run my theater company.
So at what point in your training did you mentioned at the beginning, you got to get this sense that you wouldn't work commercially, so that you would probably have to sort it out yourself. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, I remember after our second year, so where I went to school, there was a cut program at the time too. So some students were cut. There was only 24 people in a class. There was a cut program, but there was also a director's program. And
what is a cut program? Sorry, I don't recognize that term.
So if they don't think you're doing well enough or you're not talented enough, they'll cut you from the program.
Got it.
Which doesn't happen anymore. But at the time, it was, I personally believe in it because I believe in competition. I think the competition was healthy for the students, and this business is too hard to just pat us on the back and say, really good job. Hope you have fun.
You almost need to get that's part of your education is learning about the realities of being in the business.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And I remember the stress at the end of every semester. You'd get, essentially reviewed by all of your teachers and graded, of course, but how do you grade acting? So they'd write these reviews, and I had some friends who were cut, and it was devastating. But we also had a director's program going into your junior year, and the dean, Gerald Friedman, who actually was the first American director to go over to the UK to direct at the Globe actually years ago, who I respected a great deal, he said to me, I think you should consider the directing program. And to your question, when did I first go, I don't think I'm going to work? I didn't want to do that. And yet, while I didn't necessarily take it again to knock against my talent, I did. Oh, and they talked to me about my weight. I wasn't really overweight, but they talked to me about it. And I remember thinking, and there were these gorgeous guys in my class, 6'3", and I was like, I don't think, and again, this is 20 years ago now or whatever. I don't think that. So we just get different moment. I'm giving context. I was like, I will, and something about me is I, as you might even be able to tell, I'm a bit impatient, meaning I don't like other people to get to dictate when I get to create art. That's just not something that's interesting to me. And so the idea of moving to Los Angeles or moving to New York and throwing my hat in the ring at 21 years old for parts that are going to likely go to guys who look very different was just not super appealing. And so right around my junior year was when I started to go, I need to look at, and I actually started writing a bit then, meaning, and my very first job out of school was a show that I had actually written that was being produced in conjunction with a theater that I also got to be in, actually. But it was my way of like, okay, let me begin to create my own path, as opposed to just walk in with my headshot and resume and say, please, I'd really like a job. I hope you like me. Because that I just was something impulsively after getting this feedback that said this is not it for me. And I would argue too, Pete, that this is, most people feel, I don't know if this is true for you, but I hear artists all the time. They just feel completely disempowered and like they're waiting for people to pick them when we have to pick ourselves if we really want to do this.
Yeah, that's so profound, and I hope we can dig into it more. I was just re-listening to the edited version of the episode that's going out on the podcast with Izzy Stevens. You know Izzy Stevens?
I don't.
Okay. She's an actress, filmmaker. She's also a coach. And she was saying that in her world, it's exactly what you're saying. It's you get to do it your way. That there's so much of an expectation that, you get an agent and then what? And then you audition, you do self-tape and unless you are doing it the way that it's being dictated by others, then you're either not an actor or you're not doing it properly. And she began to find success in her career when she just said, fuck that, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to show up in the way that I want to show it. And she focused on writing and directing and doing things. And then she said, and the reality is now, she said, just the other day, I got a DM from someone and they said, I've written this the screenplay and I've written a part for you. And I was wondering if you'd like to read it. Just, and that's completely outside of the kind of normal way of doing things. Create your own lane and swim in it and become the best swimmer you can in a lane that only you can swim in.
This is such a great example too, Pete, of again what business is. And what I mean by that is, okay, we're going to sell socks. I don't care what the business is. While you might have a blueprint of some kind to go, how does the industry work? You're not going to play by the same exact rules of every other sock company if you want to grow something that's meaningful and impactful. This is what it means to be an entrepreneur, is to be strategic and creative and go, I don't need to do what the other hundreds or thousands of people are doing, because then I might just end up where they are. But artists and actors in particular are very scared by this. They're very scared by this idea because, I mean, I think there's many reasons, but I think a big part of it is the fear of either looking like they're working too hard, which is interesting, or feeling like they're going to upset the apple cart and everything feels so precarious that they have to play by the rules. I better not self-pitch. I better not reach out to casting, and I, sorry to be tangential, but and keeping it back to the UK, but I have several clients who I work with in the UK. And I actually hear this more in the UK because the UK are just more polite than Americans. It's just the fact. So even in the UK, there's even more trepidation sometimes of stepping outside the bounds as we know it. Would you disagree with that?
I wouldn't disagree with it. I think one of the things, after I went to drama school and I left over 30 years ago, I can't quite believe that.
Guildhall, right?
Guildford School of Acting.
Guildford, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, I worked for half a decade or so as an actor and then kind of just inevitably in some ways slid back into IT and computers, which was always my fallback.
With paying the bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when I was acting in one of the pillar episodes of my podcast, I tell the story about pitching and building a database for one of the theaters that I was one of my first jobs. And so even when I was an actor, the computers were still paying the bills. But the more I got into business, I recognized that drama school, conservatory, whatever you call it in the States, teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you breath and movement and script analysis and all the things that you learn in drama school. But what it doesn't teach you is that when you leave drama school, you are a one-man business at that point. And there's this immense focus on getting an agent. But as Izzy so eloquently said in her podcast episode, then what? It's like the agent also has a business, and guess which business they're interested in building? their own agency. So this sense of using the word agency, the sense of actors having full agency of their, we call it a career, but I think it's far more accurate to describe it as your business. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Rhetorically, or is that a real question?
Well, don't you hate it when you don't know whether a question is rhetorical or not?
Well, this is a great, listen, Pete, this is the point, because, but I am going to answer it, because here's what it looks like to me. Any business ever, I don't care what business it is, solves a problem. It fills a market need. This, and now what a tricky thing to lay at an artist's feet. What problem do you solve? But if you are asking people to help pay your phone bill and not just make art for the sake of making art, then you have to really think about it. Now, there are easy ways to consider this. It doesn't have to be such a personal, well, why is my art so important? No, it's not. I'm going to flail and flounder. No. But talking about agents, if you're going to get representation, it's because they're looking at you going, they're going to help me solve a problem to make money, because I know that they can do X, Y, or Z within the industry. So we have to ask ourselves that very question. Not just because, oh, well, I did it in the third, not even like my story. Well, I loved it. It let me express myself. At some point, that's why I was making the comparison to watching my mother grow businesses, because I can love it. It can feel really good inside of me, and I can be really, really talented. But then I have to go, and how do I monetize that in a way? And I'm sorry to make it about money, but we live in a capitalistic hellscape. That's just what it is. So we're asking people to help pay our bills with our art. We have to go, what can I do for them? Who is interested in my work? What audience might be interested? And to me, if we can begin to identify what that is, and I'll give you a good example, I know that a big problem that I solve within my industry is, and I hope I'm not being self-aggrandizing, I'm just being very transparent. I often internally go, okay, I think of myself as the Philip Seymour Hoffman of musical theater. That's what I think of myself. I have the skill set of being musical, but I know that what I bring to the table is more human, actor-driven, lyric-driven, thought-driven. I know that that's a problem that I solve for people. It's the feedback that I get. It's the parts that I get. And again, I'm not patting myself on the back here. I'm using it as an example to go, how do we reflect as artists in such a way that allows us then to empower ourselves to either sharpen those skills, market them, and even make the relationships that we need to based off of understanding what corner of the market we can dominate. I'm not sure if that's at all where you were going with that rhetorical or not question, but that's what comes up for me when you say that.
Well, I guess it's just a sense that I guess ultimately it comes down to, if it's going to be, then it's up to me. And I think as an actor, that's even more the case, because if you're an employee, say in a company, a large company, you can check out,
Sure.
and kind of not do the work, and you still get paid. And I think that coming into acting with that sort of mindset that somebody else will provide is not helpful. Is like there has to be this sense of, I don't know if hunger is the right word. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling a bit here, but there was just such a strong sense. The more I got into building my own software, IT and software businesses, this sense that, this is what's missing from drama school education. This understanding of sales and marketing and product market fit and networking and I think there were just so many transferable skills from the world of entrepreneurship to the world of art. So, and I actually think there's actually a crossover back the other way. I think entrepreneurs have a lot to learn from artists in terms of creativity and spontaneity and flexibility. And I think if everyone before they set up their own business did a few improv classes, I think there would probably be some more successful businesses around somehow.
100%. I'm taking notes because you said so many good things there. Number one of the things I want to I often tell artists, I actually think artists and creatives are could be some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, because we can problem solve different. We can dream, but we can also create, and we can, if we can get out of our way and not let our feelings necessarily dictate everything. You're absolutely right. That not only are also, to your point about the employer employee, that's what I'm hearing you say. We think of ourselves as employees, but we're actually employers, even when we're on contract, even when we're doing a day something on some TV show. We are employers. And if we think of ourselves that way and take more responsibility and have more perspective, ultimately, and marry, per your point, this natural skill sets we have with the idea of what it means to be an entrepreneur, we'd be pretty unstoppable. Actually, I'll tell you, just today, actually yesterday, we formalized this work that I do, that I started about 10 years ago, which was about systemizing a bit what it means to be an entrepreneur and an artist. We're going into my alma mater to begin teaching the business course, because the business course, which means so much to me, Pete, because we're starting with the seniors, but we're already talking about starting with the juniors in the spring. But get this, imagine if you and I at Guilford Hall and School of the Arts, we're freshmen. We go to our acting class, we do our Linklater work, we do whatever it is. Then we sit down, we take one class, and they say, okay, you all are creative entrepreneurs. And we spend an entire semester just understanding the mindset. At 18 years old, imagine that. And then maybe second year, we go, okay, let's talk about marketing. Maybe. Or, you said the IT stuff. I'm a believer. We're in the business of losing our jobs. I think we need to have a secondary income stream at all times, because, there will be hills and valleys. I think gig work is a bit dangerous in this industry. So let's all of you, forget the assistant, the dog walking, the bartending. What if you had to really grow a secondary income stream? And that was introduced as sophomores. Imagine where we'd be at the end of 4 years, per your point, heading into the industry, all of the good school. Oh, I can breathe. I can shake out my jaw. I can, do my scanning, whatever I need to do. But I also am prepared to sustain myself for the brutal, I don't mean to be so dire, but the brutal circumstance that is growing a career as an actor.
Yeah. Ironically, though, Joshua, I think that when that is in place, and if there's anything I can do to help you bring your program, because I've been stalking you a bit, and I'm aware of the work you're doing. You're starting in one conservatory where you studied, but what you have spent the last 10 years creating is exactly the kind of thing that I began to realize was missing from my drama school education.
Yes.
The irony, I think, is that if that was taught as part of drama education, then I think that it would have the studios really fucking scared, because they would realize that actually the actors would realize that the studios don't have to call the shot. So they actually have, because they've developed a secondary income, that if you've done your job right, they're not trading one full-time job for another.
Sure.
That makes no sense, because then you wouldn't be free to fulfill your creative life, because you're not then dependent on I was going to say handouts, but the earning money from jobs that you've been anointed by somebody else to do. It's like, well, actually, what do I really want to do? What art do I really want to make? What films, what stories do I want to tell through film or through theatre? I think it would create a profound shift in the entertainment industry that if I'm honest, is absolutely needed. I mean, how many reboots of Spider-Man really do you want to see in a lifetime? How many, what sequel number do you want to get to of a film before you think, really? Are there no other stories that can be told? Just I don't know, just bringing art back into the world of art, which has been hijacked by accountants and money men. I don't know. So I think
I'm so with you, Pete. And if I may, and this is where you said you listened to that Castability podcast with Amanda, where Amanda, as a casting director, is a bit of an outlier, is what she sees and what I think you see and what we see is that the industry is all not only changing and might shift that autonomy that could be scary for people like studios, if not even representation, and some of the people even right above us, quote unquote, but it's needed for it to continue to survive. If we create an open marketplace where we embrace the Phoebe Waller-Bridges, the Jim Cummings, the Issa Raes, the people of the world who are out there continuing to make their own work, to me, everybody wins. I mean, the people at the top are always going to be scared of losing power. That's just, again, capitalism for you.
In any arena.
Yeah, exactly. So there will be people who will be closed-minded. And in our industry, there are. I'm thankfully I don't really talk to my agent so much about this and like this because I have a different relationship, but my manager, who's very much an entrepreneur, understands it and gets it. He's not afraid, but I know that there are plenty of reps who are even agents and managers who are afraid of this because I actually interviewed a manager yesterday for our podcast who was saying, I see a world in the future where reps might not even be needed. And I'll tell you, Pete, kind of in line with this to get really micro as a micro example, I have plenty of representation. I self-pitch nonstop. I self-pitch for the longevity of my relationships because it's my career, 10, 20, 30 years out, along with the idea of what you're bringing up, which is go make your work. Go make your work. Don't wait for X, Y, or Z studio head to say, oh, yes, I think that's good enough to do. Go build your own relationships with money people to raise your own funds to produce your work. Because not only, yes, it might be hard, quote unquote, but again, what's the alternative? Sitting back and saying, well, I hope someone one day gets to finally decide that I'm good enough to play in the arena. I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds very scary.
Yeah, and so much easier to do though, Joshua, as you said, when you have an income that sustains you, that pays the bills, that allows you to take time off when you need to. So there isn't this constant sense of where I'm going to have to take this. I'm going to have to take this project. Even though it's with people that I don't like and in a place that I don't really care for, because I need the money, and that's the thing that kills the art, I think.
I think this is a really important point too. I was just talking to somebody else about this, about being able to be picky, if for no other reason than to make sure you're telling the right story. My first agents, who I like them, it ended amicably, but I remember them saying at the beginning of our working together, we're going to let the industry decide where you belong. Now, look, there is something to be said for, going, oh, how is my work being perceived and where is it being picked up? There's something to be said for that. But again, what's underlying a lot of what we're talking about is the disempowerment of artists a lot of times. Yes, we're focusing, and both of us, I think, focus a bit through the lens of actors, but I would argue this is for the potter. This is for the screenwriter. There's just same similarities in cultural malady that puts us in a position of not taking the bull by the horns and saying, no, but this is what I know I have to offer. This is what I know I can do. I won't say the show or some of the theaters, but there's actually a couple of projects, for example, even though I work in musical theater, I have to be careful because what I uniquely bring to the table is exactly that. It's unique. So I can't go and do Grease, right? If all I do is Grease and the Little Mermaid and then I start to lose some of the coarseness, the edge of my storytelling. and I need to be able to hold on to playing the creepy guy on Law and Order, making sure I do a couple plays a year, but representation, the reason why this matters and what we're talking about, they just want this check, right? They're not so much thinking, oh, well, he shouldn't do that, because they're not necessarily thinking about, especially for developmental artists. The bigger you get when you're with UTA, CAA, etc., then maybe they're having some of those conversations. But early on, and sorry to be tangential, but it's so important, Pete.
You can't be tangential on the Not a Straight Line podcast. The clue's in the name.
Exactly. So to be tangential, I would say that for developmental artists, this is actually more important and more of our responsibility, and yet all the more challenging, if that makes sense. Meaning, in the beginning, when people are, and it's funny, I someone referred to me as developmental, and I am absolutely developed. I'm not a Tony nominee. I don't have 3 awards, but I've been doing this for a very long time. But I'm still considered development. That's still my label in this industry. And for developmental artists, we have to be clear, and we have to be strong-willed and intentional, so that we don't get lost in the shuffle, and that we don't just become one of the many. And yet it's at the moment when that's exactly what everybody wants to do to us, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. There's something that you said earlier about taking the bull by the horns, sort of just expressing there in terms of getting really clear about, what it is that you want to do. And the thought that came to me when you said that was that, well, is it really any surprise that people find it difficult to do that? Actors, we're talking about actors in particular, when our whole society, our whole upbringing is about fitting in, is about, you go to school and you learn this and you regurgitate this, for your SATs or your other exams or whatever. And you go to school and high school and you go to college and then you get a job and you fit in, you just get into the machine. That there's so much of being an actor and an artist, and to be fair, an entrepreneur, really, for that matter, that is outside of the machine.
Yes.
The machine isn't designed to create artists and entrepreneurs. So as soon as you step up and identify either as an artist or an entrepreneur, or heaven forbid, an entrepreneurial artist,
you're right.
You're outside of the machine. So you have no guide. You have no. How do I say? There's no. Help me out here, Joshua. What am I trying to say?
No. I'll tell you, because here's what's hitting for me. Again, we're coming back to this idea of entrepreneurialism. I listen. I'm sure as just some you do as well. There are a lot of entrepreneurs I listen to: Hormozy, Gary Vee, Tim Ferriss. Mark Cuban, big guys specifically, and women. But Barbara Corcoran's actually a great example. Listen to Barbara Corcoran talk about growing her real estate business from a marketing standpoint. The greatest entrepreneurs in the world, they don't play by the rules. And the reason why it relates back to me for what you're saying is that, yes, we're trying to be pushed into this machine. And again, to be purposefully tangential, one of the things that's ironic about the entertainment industry is, and I don't want to lose a thought, so I'm writing something down. One of the things that's interesting about the entertainment industry is that there's no real structure to it. This is what kills me about this machine that we tried to get put into. In the world of tech, in the world of cars, in the world of real estate, we see blueprints that you could at least go, okay, I understand how to calculate my cost of customer acquisition. We get some basics. But when it comes to the creative arts in particular, we're supposed to play by these hazy, non-existent bullshit rules that again become more of a, I'm not sure if I can curse, but
you can,
but more of a mind fuck, more than anything else that holds us back, because we're like, well, that one casting person told me that I shouldn't, I won't say the name of one, but there's one in the States, for example, a big one, who says, I never want an actor to email me unless they have at least one television credit. Well, I'm so sorry. That's such BS to me. That's her opinion. And in my vantage point in this, if someone from casting is pissed off that I, reached out and said, hey, I think I'm a great fit for this, and I just wanted to say hello, honestly, fuck them, But I want to say something about that blueprint as well, because it's actually Hormozy talking about AI. Hormozy, who I like a lot, he, at least I listen to his podcast a lot. He talks a lot about using AI. When I want to solve X, Y, or Z, I'll put goals into Chat GPT and say, I want to have X, Y, or Z business goals completed within 5 to 10 years. Give me an outline for D, 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 D. And again, in most industries, ChatGPT might actually churn something out that could be pretty useful. And then you could use your, again, to your point, creativity, if you're a creative entrepreneur, to shape that. Artists, we don't have that. Think about it. If we did the same thing, okay, I want to work in the West End in 5 years. Here's where I'm at today. What is the best path? Now, it might come up with some basics that you and I both might look at and go, sure, in a general sense, it's going to tell you to get a photo. It's going to some kind of stuff, but it's unique unto itself. So what is the point that I'm trying to underline here? Well, going back to this idea of being an entrepreneur, what it means to be a self-starter and what it means to be an entrepreneur is, I would argue, to look at quote unquote data. Okay, I want to have X, Y, or Z's career, so I understand the basics of the world they're playing in. But how does that relate to me? How do I think outside the box? How do I take risks? How do I do all of this in 2024? Again, purposefully tangential. At a moment when having an owned audience is what it means to practically be relevant and alive, let alone, for artists especially. How do I use that? I'm not the kind of artist that's going to be making TikToks. Okay, no problem. But then how are you going to market? And, these questions and this challenge is laid at our feet as entrepreneurs, and no one path looks the same. No one's art is, and I have to say, this is also why we are uniquely positioned, I think, to do some of the greatest shit in the world, because no one can offer. I can't offer what you offer. You can't offer what I can offer. And then it's up to us to uniquely go, okay, how do I understand what the essence of that is? And how do I share it on as wide of a scale as needed to meet my goals? Because there might be someone who's in Milwaukee and says, I just want to have a sustainable career in Milwaukee doing 6 shows a year regionally. If I may, that's a miracle unto itself, as opposed to the person who says, I want to work. I have clients who come and work with us and say, I want to be an international face and I want to be a Marvel star. Well, then we really have to deal with the question, well, what does that take? And what it's going to take for that person is going to be entirely unique, because maybe a hot take, we are not all created equal.
Yeah.
When it comes to circumstances, goals, dreams, abilities. And therefore, the challenge for us is sort of going, okay, well, what does that mean for me? And do I have the emotional maturity to objectively look at that, take that information in, and turn that into action that I'm analyzing, improving along the way to hopefully meet those goals? I hope that was trackable, what I'm saying.
Yeah, it is. And just to talk to your point about, I want this in 5 years, Marvel star, is that I might even start with another question behind that is like, that sounds great. Why? Why those goals in particular?
Yeah, good point.
And just digging into that, because those, I know you just use those goals as an example. That speaks to having goals that fit in with somebody else's reality of the world. Whereas for me, the goals that really excite me are goals that create the reality that I want to live in.
I think I'm so glad you said that, because that question of why, right? It's one thing to say, to your point, or to my point, but then getting back to your point, it's one thing to say, oh, this is what I uniquely have to offer, but what am I doing any of this for? And that why, another word is a mission. We actually, when we help artists craft artist statements, we craft them as we would an organizational statement. Mission, values, and vision, not just a statement of the kind of art we want to make. But why do I get up in the morning to do this? What do I value? And where do I see myself going? And how are all of those interconnected? And the reason, if I may, and maybe this is what you're also saying, but maybe not, the reason why that feels so important is because, unlike the sock company, unlike SpaceX, unlike real estate, we are the product. And I can't speak to your experiences, the wins and losses, but again, I'll use the word again, this is brutal. So even separate from goals, having a connection to something that feels true to us, not just about, a career high, a mile marker of Broadway or being in a major movie.
Series regular, or
exactly.
I hear that a lot,
100%. What is it that like, and sometimes that might take really being quiet and listening and going, is this, and if I may actually, I'll be honest, going back to what we said at the top of this conversation, sometimes I really miss what was at the beginning, the theater, my theater company, working in DC, because working commercially is a very different process, conversation, and I miss the community, when I joined that revival of Les Mis, I'll be honest, I say it openly, and I would tell Karen McIntosh myself this, that, it was a really horrible experience in a lot of ways. And it was really horrible, not because of one person per se, but because it wasn't about the work. It was about the machine. It was about the money, as opposed to the 7-week run of X, Y, or Z play at a 250 seat theater where everybody cares so much because we only get to have this for this brief moment in time. So how that relates to this idea of why is I find myself coming back to this sometimes, going, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this version of it? Could I be happy in Michigan? I said earlier, could I be happy in the West End making less money in what feels like sometimes to me a culture that is more interested in the work than maybe it feels like it is here in New York? Is that more true to myself? TBD. But I just think I'm just really dovetailing off of that why, because I think that's a really important point.
We've gone on a few tangents of this conversation, and there's so much about this conversation, which is, you might use the term blueprint there, is creating a blueprint. It's an archetypal, not a straight line conversation. Yeah. It's the ones that I want to capture for the podcast. I do want to go back. We started the tangents when your lecturer, or whatever you call them, was advising you to go on the director's program in the third year, was it?
Yeah.
And you did that, I presume?
I did not.
Oh, you didn't do it?
I chose not to do it, to be honest, because I remember very specifically, I could sit behind the table and watch people, were next to the guest director and learn from them, and they watch them direct other actors. Or I could sit and watch and do it. Like, I could do both. It wasn't implausible to me. Yes, I might have missed out on my scene design classes, on working with a scenic designer. But if I may, getting back to doing, when I ran my theater company, I learned from doing. I directed 2-3 shows a year. And that was when I learned how to direct. I didn't need my classes to do that.
It is the best way, yeah. You carried on then, you graduated, although you said that you didn't do some of the academic stuff because you were so focused on the acting. Just talk us through the presumably non-straight line journey from graduating from University of the Arts North Carolina to starting your theater company.
Yeah. So when I was at the school, in the midst of not doing my academics, I produced. My first real big acting gig was right after junior. Great job when you're still at school. You got to go do summer stock of sorts at the beach in North Carolina. Maybe like $600 a week, which as a first acting gig was great. At the time, again, 20 something years ago, maybe more. And there's a woman, amazing woman named Ann Cohn, who was in the performing arts management program at the School of the Arts. And she said, I know you do a lot of self-starter things. I have had this idea of wanting to do Hedwig and the Angry Inch. And would you be interested in it? And I said, absolutely. What's interesting is she was actually asking me if I was interested in playing Hedwig. I thought she was asking me to direct it. I say it because we had several conversations, and before you know it, in senior year of college, we were producing and raising money to produce this production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch. The reason it relates to all this in the very not a straight line version is we sold it out in North Carolina. I was very proud of the production. We had an offer, quote unquote, offer / nudge from an artist, another fellow alum who was working in DC to come do it at a great venue in DC. And at the time was having early conversations about working at Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington, DC. We ended up taking the show to DC, sold it out entirely. I remember I was in tears, Pete. I'll never forget. We were nobody. Nobody knew us. An opening night of the show, because we didn't have previews. We were just opening this randomly. Not only was the show sold out, people were pouring in. We got this amazing review in the Washington Post. So the show
what did you
sold
do?
out.
How? Okay, so just straight on that. I mean, I've been involved in many productions where that isn't the case.
The good review or getting the press?
Getting the full house, you know, and it's never a function of the play or the actors or whatever. I mean, I saw a production just last week of Love Song by Abby Morgan. I don't know if you know the piece. Just one of the most beautifully sublime, moving pieces of theatre. You know, if you weren't sobbing audibly by the end of the production, you know, then you had an emotional piece of you missing kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was less than half full. And this was towards the end of the run. And I just think this is a travesty. You know, this is art as it is meant to be in terms of changing lives. You know, you would come out of the theatre a changed person. Your level of consciousness would be raised as a result of having witnessed that production. So what did you do that allowed you to sell out?
Well, it's going to bring us back to a theme.
Who did you bribe?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the gays, I'll tell you that much. No, but partially, but I'm partially kidding because that is a bit of a cult piece. Hedwig is like Rocky Horror. It has a unique following unto itself. Just to say, we also though, and this is the reason why I named Ann Cohn, whose birthday it was yesterday. Happy birthday, Ann. Who I don't talk to very much anymore, but. When people ask me, and it's going to get back to your question, when people ask me, how do I start a theater company? What do you suggest I do? I always say, make sure there's a business person. And this is why this is a theme in this entire conversation where I learned so much, even from those early days of doing this, because it wasn't enough to say we're doing this great piece of art. We produced Hedwig during Pride in Washington, D.C. We knew who the demographic was. I'm going to be tangential. We just had a great actor turned producer on our podcast, Creative Risk, called Clayton Howe. Clayton Howe produced a play off Broadway you might have heard or not. It was called Dracula, Comedy of Terrors. It's a great play. The guy playing Dracula, gorgeous. Why does it relate? Because the theater was in Hell's Kitchen, which is basically the gayborhood here in New York. And I said, how did you sell it? He said, I did one thing. I focused on getting all of Hell's Kitchen, and that's it. I didn't try to get all of New York. How does this relate to Love Song and Hedwig, and how do we sell it? Know your audience, and most importantly, find dynamic ways to market your show. How that relates to the idea of a business person, you know, and someone like Anne, is there has to be some sort of strategy, some sort of strategic plan to say, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to do a web series. I'm going to produce a film. What are the goals you have? Could be as simple as, I want to sell it out, or I want to get this developed for, you know, on a larger scale. And you have to go, well, how do I, quote unquote, package it in a way that's going to be interesting? I could break down more specifics of Hedwig in particular, but I would say its cult following and us producing it the week of Pride in Washington, D.C., in the heart of Washington, D.C., specifically location. We hit The Blade, which was a gay publication. We hit Queer Tea. We knew where to put our marketing dollars, and we knew how to sell the attractive folks in our show in a way that was going to sell those tickets. And then we made the show really fucking good. So that then when people came, what's the best form of press? Word of mouth. Does that sort of answer your question at all?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think part of the challenge of the theatre that I saw Love Song at is that they treat every show the same. It's like they have a marketing process or a machine or whatever, and every show goes through that rather than thinking about this particular show, who is an ideal audience member for this show, And like you say, use the term, dynamic needs. What are some dynamic, creative ways of reaching that particular audience member?
Can I say one more thing about that, Pete, actually, just to
Yeah,
say
of
for
course.
anybody who might be listening, who might be thinking about producing, and Gary, these are not my words, these are Gary Vee's words. And I actually, not to promote his book, but his book, Day Trading Attention, his new book, it came out about a month ago, is great. And here's it. We live in a moment when the most effective marketing in the world is free and democratized, and that is social media. So to your point, and this is a lot of theaters get this wrong. I don't know the audience for Love Song, but there should be a completely different consideration for the social campaign, which has the biggest reach in 2024 than any other production they're doing that year. And not only will that potentially sell tickets to the show, and I don't, wouldn't know the circumstance enough to say what that should look like, but they'll reach a wider audience. Just to say like that, we live in a moment where social media is free and democratized, and it won't be that way for long. It will not be that way for long. Sorry to be I had to say that.
That's okay. And we got to Hedwig exploring your non-straight line journey into having your own production company. So that was the start of it, was it?
Well, so we sold the show out in DC. I remember I had that sort of in the back of my head. I had some agents who were sort of somewhat courting me even when I was at school. But again, I was like, I don't know if New York or LA is going to be the right thing. And got the job at Shakespeare Theater Company as the associate managing director. And my best friend and I, who was sort of he's a casting director now at Telsey out in LA, and a wonderful filmmaker and writer himself. We were all he had updated the script for Hedwig, and we were all sort of at this crossroads. And we had an opportunity to do Hedwig again, to remount it in DC.
Mm-hmm.
And because Anne was going to take this job, we all looked at each other and said, well, what if we started a theater company? And we started it in DC, which, much to some people's surprise, DC is the number 2 theater city in the country, even before Chicago.
Wow.
In the United States.
Measured by what?
Equity contracts. So union work. And we looked at each other and we said, why not give it a go? Interestingly enough, I was in audition. There's a great theater in DC called Arena Stage. I was up for a play there. I booked it and had a great job there right away. And before I knew it, and I have to say this again to the business person alongside any artistic venture, having that mindset independently or bringing someone else in. Our first budget of our first year was $34,000. And within a matter of years, we had grown that by over 200%. We grew so quickly, and it was because of the consideration of everything alongside the art. To your point about Love Song, I don't want to come for that artistic organization, by the way. I'm sure they're doing great work. But and before we knew it, the company exploded. So it started out as a bit of a, I don't know, let's give it a go.
What if?
Exactly. Turned into, I'm looking at above me is we have the Helen Hayes Awards in DC, and in a year in, we got the John and Yellow, which was the award for the outstanding emerging theater company. And next thing you know, we were in the spotlight, and the company, well, because you asked, I will continue to say this. There was then this opportunity didn't start in North Carolina. We started in DC, but then there was this $50 million complex being built in Winston-Salem, where I went to school. And someone said, have you ever thought about bringing some of your work to North Carolina? And then we said, well, what if we became a dual city? It would allow us to raise money from both cities. It would allow for us to program various times throughout the year. We love Winston-Salem. And before you know it, we were operating out of 2 different cities, which I have to say was a huge part of the company's success from a financial standpoint, because if we couldn't raise the $150,000 we needed in DC, North Carolina had much less competition and allowed us to do that. So next thing I knew, I was steeped in running a theater company.
This is really quite moving for me in terms of our conversation, because in some sense we're back to where we started when I asked about your biggest zag, and it was giving up the theater company. And having spent the last hour and a quarter really going into a bit more of the nuances of what got you to that theatre company, it really throws into really stark relief what it must have been like for you in terms of making that decision to give it up.
Yeah. I remember in the final days, and I've since apologized to my final board chair, but being on the phone with her as we were essentially having to leave the space we were in, the theater we were in residence, and they were throwing files away into the dumpster of years of our seasons, and just like, where can they need it to be done? I'm not vilifying, but I remember this. I hung up on her. It was this huge we had this huge fight because it was hard for all of us. And while I don't regret again, I don't know. I don't know. Would you do that? I'm sorry. I'm throwing the question randomly at you. If I don't know what your goals are, but if you had an opportunity to say, "Hey, Pete, okay, I know you've got this going on, but we want you to come beyond Broadway," what would you have done it? What would you have done?
They're so hard to say, isn't it? Because you can only live moment by moment with where you are. Putting myself in your shoes, thinking back to the 11-year-old Joshua that saw the show on Broadway, and you'd never acted on Broadway before.
Ever? No.
So just thinking back to that 11-year-old Joshua whose life was changed from seeing Annie Get Your Gun on Broadway, being given an opportunity to, I don't know whether it was part of your thinking, but maybe to create a theatrical experience that another 11-year-old would be at, whose life might be changed. I would suspect that yes, I would probably make the same decision. But who can say? But the biggest thing for me is that recognition that how you shared with us that your life was changed from seeing a show on Broadway, and that being given an opportunity to maybe it was an opportunity to reconnect to that 11-year-old Joshua and the life that he saw for himself.
Isn't that funny you just said that? Because I want to say something about what you just said about to connect with that 11-year-old in relation to the why. Sometimes if I'm talking to an artist and they're seemingly stuck, and we talk about a why, or, what are we doing this for in the first place? The thing that comes up for me, and I often say, is, well, let's go back to the beginning. Why are we doing this? And I say it because, as I was just sort of reflecting a bit ago when we were talking, I find myself doing that sometimes. It's so easy to get caught up in, especially as we get older. I don't know if this is true for you, but, especially as we get older in this business, it's, things are put in front of you. We have families, we have health, we've got, long-term financial considerations. And I say financial because of how unstable this industry is.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to, I'll give you a literal, I told you I was in this producer session this morning. I'm supposed to start rehearsals for another show on Monday. The show I'd really like to do. If I book this TV job, I would make 4 times the amount of money in 1 week than I would in the entire gig that I'm about to do. I might have to drop it. And how it relates to this conversation and what in this moment is, I'm going, okay, but is that worth it? Because the show that I'm about to do, I don't know about you, but I get so much more joy out of doing it. I love the theater. I certainly wish it paid more than X, Y, or Z crime procedural. But at the same time, I have debts. At the same time, I've got the months ahead to look at. At the same time, my partner and I need a new couch. So there's this question of like how we balance the practical with the passion in all of this as well, which is such a unique challenge. Because I'm bringing it back to this why. I would argue, even though I make the case that we are entrepreneurs like any other entrepreneur, where we're not is, I would argue, somewhat around that why. Because the why of X, Y, or Z running the sock company could very well have to do with building a stable life for their family. Whereas our why we went to school 20, 30 years ago and started pursuing all of this, and still to this day are fighting for a chance to do it for the rest of our lives, likely is going to be bigger than, and in fact, probably wouldn't make sense. So I want to build a life for my family because this is probably not the way to do it.
Yes.
Should probably sell socks.
Yeah.
I don't even know where that came from there, but going back to the beginning. Yes, to your point. And you ask, and talking about that zag and that life decision of joining Les Mis, and I have to say, even though it was a very difficult experience, the 30 odd times that I actually got to go on for the amazing Gavin Lee, who's British and just was over there doing Old Friends. He was our Thenardier. The 30 or so times I got to go on were some of the best experiences of my life. I mean, it was, I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but it was transcendent for me. I mean, it was an out of body experience when I got to do that part in that gorgeous theater. That was literally everything 11-year-old Joshua could dream of. And so and when I think about that it totally feels worth it, even though giving up was so challenging. Giving up that theater was so challenging.
Anything that we want in life, which carries the biggest meaning, I think also carries the biggest sacrifice.
Sure. As RuPaul says, although I don't think RuPaul says this, with great power comes great responsibility, a slightly different version of that. That's not RuPaul who says that. Who says that with great power comes great responsibility?
I don't know.
Okay. It's not RuPaul, I promise. They probably took it from someone else. I'm curious. I mean, if I may, I know that, we're chatting, but when you started this cast, is that because after the time you took away from pursuing acting full time, that this is now coming around to you pursuing this as a primary, as your future full time career?
I'm being drawn back into a creative career for sure. Yeah, when I was 20 odd years old, I was on the top deck of a bus. I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to get to 40 and wonder what my life would have been like if I'd gone to drama school. So I was living in Hong Kong at the time, so I applied to drama school. And that was, so self-tape now is just like, it's de rigueur.
Right.
But I submitted a real self-tape, filmed on a VHS tape with an old clunky VHS camera. And I got in. And so I'm being drawn back into a creative career. My IT, I ended up running a software company, walked away from that at the end of 21, mental health, not in a great place. Found a job which just gave me space just to be and to think, and this is where I'm at. But I recognized that, so I kind of hid from the world really for a couple of years while I was doing that and getting back on my feet. And I just recognized that in order to create the life that I want, the short answer is that a mentor of mine told me many years ago that opportunity always comes attached to people. Opportunity always comes attached to people. Think of all the stories you've told me, like Hedwig's the most recent one, that there was a person that was attached to that opportunity, Anne Cohn. So I thought, well, I need to find a way of connecting with more people and talking to them. And I've always, been a natural connector and collaborator. So I thought, well, what better way than to start a podcast that gives me an excuse to contact anyone that I want to talk to and have a conversation.
That's right.
Yeah, and it also supports the business that I'm setting up. To speak to your point about actors should always have a second income, there is a business on the side of this which is about helping entrepreneurs start their own podcast called Activate Your Podcast. And I thought it was disingenuous to be talking to entrepreneurs about starting their own podcast with a kind of and not have one. Yeah. So actually the I don't know if you wouldn't have, because they only went live this week. But the pillar episodes, the first 5 episodes of this podcast, are as a result of this podcast going through the Activate Your Podcast process. So they create a story-based kind of snapshot of who the entrepreneur is, what their story is, what problems they solve, what value they bring to the world. They kind of just as a foundation to the podcast, which they can then take on and run with.
Smart.
Yeah. So if you get a chance, perhaps listen to the first few episodes of this.
Yes.
So yeah, that's why I'm doing it. And I kind of smiled to myself inwardly when you were saying about, when you're starting things, you have to be strategic and whatever. And I'm thinking, well, I don't really have a tremendously well thought out strategy for Not a Straight Line, other than it's affording me the opportunity to have some incredible conversations. This one, being textbook case with some incredible people, and I know that that's only going to grow, because the more great conversations I have, the more evidence I'm giving my subconscious that I can have the sort of conversations that I want to have, that are meaningful to me and to my guest, and I would say and the world. But actually, and I shared this with Izzy's my coach, and I shared this with her during our call, that actually I'm realizing that I'm doing this podcast for me. It's being incredibly selfish about it. She said, and you know what? Because of that, it will be meaningful for other people as well, because you are solving a specific problem for yourself. So
I
yeah,
really resonate with that because while the work of artist strategy and our podcast, Creative Risk, where it came out of, it's there for people to consider and again, for us to go into schools or wherever and help actors with it. We're asking ourselves the same questions. How does this work? And Mike and I always talk about that, we have, it's this kind of existential game we play with offering the work by way of living and breathing it and needing it ourselves. So even within the challenge, it's sort of its own gift. But listen, I'm grateful to have met. It was just we only exchanged a few emails, so
yeah.
I'm grateful that we've been able to have this conversation. It's been reflective for me and making me think about a few things, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I do. I mean, you're kind of doing my job of wrapping up the conversation. I can
I'm
tell
not
that
trying to.
you can
Sorry.
tell. No, it's great. It's. I always think that talking to fellow podcasters
Yeah.
is there's kind of sense of it. But you have kind of alluded to where you're at in your current career from an entrepreneurial perspective. I mean, you've shared about some of the roles that you're going for. But just then you mentioned artist strategy for the first time. Just tell me and the listener a little bit more about that, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for.
Yeah. I'll tell you the moment when it sort of created itself. I used to work at a few schools in DC, Catholic University, American University, a few schools on and off. And they had a senior showcase. Catholic did it in particular. And I was running my company at the time and following and I was in the midst of running my theater. And following the showcase, one of the seniors reached out to me and they sent me an email with no subject line and nothing in the body of the email. They had their headshot and resume. And I
Oh my
remember
God.
I forwarded this to their faculty and I said, what are you teaching them? And I'll never forget that moment because at the same time, I was oh my gosh, every day was a new learning curve. Oh, we've got to raise $35,000 in 24 hours or we can't start rehearsal. Oh, we've got to figure out a new marketing plan for whatever the hell it was. I was, getting my MBA just day to day. And I sort of was like, why are artists, independent artists, why are we not being taught at UNC and say in Guildford? Why are we not being taught these things? Because to me, artists do not tend to come with a shortage of passion or talent. That's not really the issue. The issue is they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to share it. They don't know how to sell it. I'm not just saying marketing. I'm saying they don't know how to put it out there and say, I've got something to offer. I hope you'd consider it. And that was when I started taking all of what I was learning and considering what a system, quote unquote, or a curriculum, quote unquote, might look like. And I started testing it out at the various universities. I was working mainly with seniors. And it started with simple things, oh, here's a little sheet to keep track of professional contacts. And here's a way to financials is always a huge one. And very little information on not only the foundations of financial management, Pete, but how that relates to artists, because our monies is always zigzagging all over the place. Talk about not a straight line. And then all of a sudden, before you knew it, I was creating a 5-year plan template, and that became a home base to consider what I believe are the 7 primary components of what our careers are made up of, which is professional growth or goal setting, what I call community cultivation or relationship building, financial management, craft improvement, of course, marketing, self-producing, and what we call method, but really it's workflow. How do you manage your time? How do you get up and prioritize? And I think all those pieces, just like any business ideally would consider, has to be a consideration for artists. And that became artist strategy, which was primarily a one-on-one business, has been for years, although we've then created some e-learning and, like I said, are now beginning the early stages of going into a number of universities. I'll be honest and say that going into universities and the whole business as a whole is a bit of a experiment. And let me explain why. I don't think we have the option as to whether or not we want to be entrepreneurs But what artist strategy is experimenting is, can that be taught? Can you teach someone how to be an entrepreneur, or is that something that's innate? And the question's still out for me, because there are people who come to work with us or take to our work and they go, this makes so much sense, and it flows and it's easy and they're making strides. And other people who are completely buried underneath it. And I find the younger they are, which is why I say the experiment is with the going into schools, the harder it is. This next generation, very anti-labor. They don't want to have to work so hard. I'm not saying they're lazy. That's not what I'm talking about. But capitalism is not interesting to them. And they are not so stoked about the idea of having to ask that question. How do I uniquely take up space in the industry? What problem do I solve? And so, honestly, the jury's still out on whether or not this is something that can be taught. But what, for me, the jury is not out on is that it's kind of a must, at least consideration, if we're going to really make a play for building a sustainable life as an artist. An interesting conundrum.
Yeah. I love how you use the word jury there, because the story that you told right at the very begining.
Yeah,
you're on jury duty. I was like, I was just thinking, wow, what a master!
It haunts me.
Joshua is at bringing things around. I mean, I just give my 2 cents to that. I would say that, and you've used the word a few times in different contexts, but I would say that if you're starting with the mindset work that's necessary to succeed in life, let alone succeed as an entrepreneur or as an artist, again, succeed in inverted commas, what does that even mean? Then that's 55 times around the sun, and it's finally recognizing and not just recognizing, but finally doing the mindset work necessary to get the results that I want. Maxwell Maltz, plastic surgeon in the 50s, recognized that even though he could operate on people and change their appearance, some people still consider themselves to be ugly or have a big nose. And he recognized that it's impossible for someone to consistently behave in a manner that's inconsistent with how they see themselves. If you have a concept of what it means to be an entrepreneur or business owner, then that is going to influence your behavior. So we need to change the conversation about what it actually means to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is somebody who solves problems. That's what I see.
And almost to your point, if I may, I used the word delusion. I didn't mean it pejoratively, because almost to your point, because this is another real cultural malady for actors. You do need to have the confidence. You don't need to say I'm better than everybody else and more deserving, but you do need to have the confidence that you're great and that you have something uniquely to offer. And this might sound maybe a little obvious, but there are so many artists who don't carry that confidence. And to your point about Maxwell Maltz, it's we see what we believe in our actions and subsequently are dictated as such. And again, it's not about being cocky and self-serving and but again, you're selling socks. You need to believe the socks are valuable. You can't say, oh, well, sometimes they get holes in them and they fall apart and they're not that great just because we're uncomfortable with owning it. This is important.
Yeah, it is. Listen, are you sure you don't actually secretly want to start a sock company?
I know. I do love socks. It's a good question. I'd probably make more money.
Yeah, but if there's one thing that's come through this conversation, that it's not about the money.
That's right. That's right.
I'm so pleased that I acted on my impulses and I started this podcast, because it gave me the opportunity to connect with you and say, look, heard you on this podcast. I think we're coming at the same thing from different angles, and I'd love to have a chat with you. And this conversation has not disappointed in any way, shape, or form. Has exceeded my expectations. It's been illuminating, insightful, and fun. I've just really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit, and look forward to many years of connection and collaboration and exploration on this non-straight line journey that our own individual non-straight line journeys have brought us together, and look forward to where they take us in the future.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Pete. This has been great.
Yeah. At the end of our conversations, I ask one question. The question is, I want you to imagine that it's 6-7 months time. your episode of the podcast has already been and gone, and it's great. It sounds as good actually listening to it as it was actually being involved in it. But you obviously subscribe to the Not a Straight Line podcast. It's become one of your favorite podcasts on your podcast app. And in 7 months' time, you see a notification from Not a Straight Line that a new episode has been released. And when you see who my conversation is with that week, you say to yourself, oh man, I'm really looking forward to hearing that conversation. Who is it? Who should I have a conversation with for Not a Straight Line Journey for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you who. Great friend of mine, a great mentor, and someone I look up to a great deal, Nick Blaemeyer. Nick Blaemeyer wrote a show that was on Broadway when he was 18 years old. He's been on Broadway many times, but he's a great actor, filmmaker, writer, person with a huge heart, an artist I look up to. He has a show that's about to open at Brooklyn Academy of Music. His career is constantly zigzagging, the furthest thing from a straight line, and someone I've looked up to 10 years before I met him and was in his show. So Nick Blaemeyer is that artist for me.
And would you be able to connect us, or you do not have that sort of? Okay,
of course,
right. That'd be great.
Of
we
course.
Can talk about that.
It would be an honor. I think he would love you too.
Yeah, amazing, my friend. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
And that, as they say in the world of film, whatever, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Not a Straight Line. If this conversation helped to reorient your internal compass or inspired you in any way, please let us know by heading to podcast.notastraightline.life/rate and leave a rating and review. Thanks as always to Matthew Bliss of MB Podcast Services for his exquisite engineering of this episode. If you'd like him to help you with your podcast, contact details are in the show notes. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, or there's someone whose non-straight line journey you'd just love to hear, then please visit podcast.notastraightline.life/guest. Thanks for being here with me, and I'll see you next week for another amazing, deep, inspiring non-straight line journey. Love you.